The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Welcome to it. Great to be with you. Midweek editions here. It's Hail Varsity Radio. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. We're powered by Hurrdat Sports. Can find us and follow us on social media. The Hail Varsity YouTube channel. Can watch the show that way. Could also find us on the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed at HVarsity Radio. Numbers to get in, 489-1240, 489-1240, 800-825-5865, wherever you hear us across the Hail Varsity Radio Network. And find Elijah on Twitter at Herbal Essence for Elijah Herbel and at Schmidt_radio for me, Chris Schmidt. Mike Babcock joins us here in about 20 minutes from Hail Varsity. We'll spend some time with Evan Bland and plenty of room for you to get in. It is the midweek edition. It is midterm discussion time, and we are at the midway point, so we'll get some grades out. We've done some grading on specific games, but as you look at the first six and you kind of project to the next six, it'll be pretty intriguing with how Nebraska ends their season/semester. Elijah, you to me didn't strike me as a fella that had many problems academically. You, I'm sure, put the work in. Some of it might have come easy for you, but there was never any reference to Spies Like Us, great mid-'80s movie where you had two dingbats, Dan Aykroyd, Chevy Chase, trying to get into the FBI or CIA. I forget which one it was. But they were two pigeons sent into Russia during the Cold War, and they were picked out because Chevy Chase rolled in with a full, I think, left arm cast, complete with eye patch, and that's where he was storing his answers for the test. And it was...
I was wondering where you were going with this.
It was quite clear that he would pull the eye patch out, kind of focus, get the answer. He'd pull a strip out of answers from his cast. Video cameras caught it all, and these are the two guys we can send in to Russia as decoys, and hilarity ensued. Pretty good, underrated movie. So listen, there's no cheating for Nebraska. They're going to earn their way to 6 or better, or less than 6, and it'll be somewhat of a disappointment. But when we talk grades and look at this team, I'm at a bit of a tug of war on. I'm not a big style points guy. I mean, I've always appreciated physical football and just pounding away and winning the ball game, and I've come to understand what it is in the Big Ten, and that's how you live life in the West specifically. If you do blow somebody out, it is those body blows Matt Rule talks a lot about that open things up in the fourth quarter. And based on Nebraska being so wounded and how many new faces you've seen on both sides of the football, I don't think you need to complain about what it looked like. Yet I've done a lot of complaining about what it's looked like, because when you have chances to bury someone, that's not happened for Nebraska, because they've made mistakes. They've committed penalties. There's been turnovers. There's been some what the heck's going on with some of the play calling. Why can't Nebraska hold on to the football? There's all of that to it. And then I go, well, they are going to have to play a lot of freshmen at wide receiver here moving forward. Your offensive line, you can say is better, or at least they feel, all right, this is what you do best. Let's do a power run game. Let's get Piper pulling and try and get downhill with the run game. I appreciate that. They're running some option at the suggestion of some really, really good smart football people, Ron Brown, Coach Osborne, and they're using the skills they have to use. And it still is a work in progress. That's okay. So they've adapted. They're not stubborn with, here's what I want to do offensively, and it's not Whipple ball per se. It's adjusted to what the players can do, or at least sticking within that philosophy of being a physical run-first football team to win ball games. That's the ultimate goal. And as they say, was said to me by a professor, C's get degrees, Schmidt. That degree being a postseason bowl game. I think Nebraska's on the right track. You look at the next 6, and it's doable. It's absolutely doable when you look at matching things up and Nebraska's approach being one game at a time. So academically, right, as we look at the football field, the 4 quarters and where Nebraska's at right now, could be a lot worse. It's been a lot worse when you look at past seasons at this moment. This moment being 500, do you take the right turn or do you get lost taking a wrong turn when you have a chance to build on a 3-3 record?
Yeah, and quickly, I just want to get back. We'll get back into football here in a second, but you let it off by saying you didn't strike me as somebody who cheated much, if at all.
No, I said you didn't strike me as somebody that struggled in school.
No, I didn't. There is one tip I have.
I didn't say Elijah had Sharpie work on. Gee, Elijah, you're wearing a long sleeve shirt today. It's 200 degrees outside. Yeah, I'm just cognizant of the UV rays.
Cheat smarter. Here's the thing. This is for any maybe high school students out there.
Hold on. You've got you're going to.
It's barely cheating.
It's barely cheating?
Okay, here's the thing, and maybe Junior could use this. Is he in calculus yet or pre-calc or anything like that?
He's doing AP Physics.
Okay, yeah, so this would help him.
He is very selective with who he sits by to completely rat him out.
No, here's the thing. Does he have a graphing calculator, I assume? I assume they still use those in high school.
No, man. I use my kid, but I don't see him that much.
We're going to skip past that. I discovered on a graphing calculator back in high school. And I'm not sure if it was a discovery.
You can draw up offensive plays?
No. Well, you can. You can. But I digress. You can plot multiple different equations at the same time. It'll graph it out. And I learned back in high school that the graphing calculator has memory. So what you could do is you could take all the equations you would need for a math test or a physics test or what have you and plug them into your calculator. But before you run the equations, you just shut the graphing calculator off. Because what teachers would do is they'd check and make sure you didn't write on like the cover of your graphing calculator or anywhere on your graphing calculator. What they didn't ask you to do was to turn it on and go to the equations that you had ready to go before graphing. So I learned that you could quickly, at the beginning of a test, turn on your calculator and boom, there's all the equations you need on that test. Write them at the top of your paper, and then you could clear it out. No evidence of cheating.
So
you just memorize those equations to write.
You went open book without it technically being an open book test.
A little bit. You'd still have to know how to use the equations, but it was a lot easier because what I always struggled with was like, man, I don't remember learning this. What equation did I need to use here? You could just have those equations ready to go at the top of your page. It wasn't really cheating because you still had to know how to do the math, but if you had the equation, it made it a hell of a lot easier.
Sure.
There's my advice out there to anyone who's in calculus or pre-calculus.
Take a loan out, get a graphing calculator, and there you go.
I actually found my graphing calculator in the locker room at school one time, and nobody claimed it, so I guess I just got myself a free graphing calculator, which was awesome. But I digress. Back to football here.
Brett says we need to stick to sports versus talking about schooling and testing and all of that. Thank you, Brett. Chris at HaleVarsity.com is where you can email.
That was me being for the kids. I'm helping out all our high school listeners.
The best thing was
help.
to watch the one kid in class who could drive before anybody else. Right? And what I mean by that is that you had one or two buddies that maybe got to drive to school in 8th grade because he was a year or two older.
Or they had that permit that was, they can just drive to school and back, but they never.
No, he lived in town. He lived in town.
Well, there's some people, they would get there's a couple in-town exceptions that they give out.
Sure. Well,
and there's also some people that have parents that just give out some exceptions too.
Well, the kid got held back a couple times, but he was always pretty glorious at writing in number 2 pencil on said desk at Irving Junior High. So, Herbie Hancock, think of Tommy Boy with the answers to the test, and then that number 2 pencil would just rub right off of your desk if the teacher came by. Wasn't me. And I'm not routing him out by name, but it was pretty fun to watch him go to work right before test time.
Also probably pretty fun when the teacher stands up at the front of the room to see him immediately going down scrubbing away at his desk. Yeah, clearly no, there's nothing insidious going on
He was
there.
a pretty vicious nose picker, so teacher wasn't going near him. Teacher was not going near him with what was on the desk. When we talk about some of the grades in Nebraska, listen, I think if we're going to put a grade, a letter on the offense for the first 6 games, I'm right at that C, and then I jump him a plus. I give him a C plus just because of the entire injury situation. I look at where Nebraska's at from a standpoint of who they've lost, what we thought they'd have offensively going in, and the turnover issues with Grant have been problematic. Some of the issues at quarterback pre-injury were problematic. So you could make a tough argument that Nebraska is a 4-2 football team, or they're right where they need to be at 3-3. Defensively, I think they're right there at a B plus. In special teams, I'm going to give them a C plus. Too many missed field goals for me. But I'm short and sweet with kind of the why with my grades. I think you got to really take a hard look at what they've been dealt on offense. The fact that they've hunkered down and said this is how we're going to try and win, and that works. Eventually, they've been a strong team in the fourth quarter, with the exception of that Michigan game, and that's also the outlier and caveat. And moving forward, I think you're going to see a guy in Hoiberg, if he keeps the starting job and keeps earning the starting job, manage the offense, maybe get better as a thrower. I mean, he could go the other way. I just think as we've seen him through these starts, they've leaned on what he does well. And while it's not consistent, he's shown the ability to throw the football. Now, against some other defenses he'll face, it's going to have to be more consistent throwing the football. But I think you can find a guy like Fedoni. I look more for a Fleeks to step up. And I think if Grant's going to be able to earn some trust, I like the check down to Grant. I mean, it doesn't have to be super exotic with how you get 4 yards on first down. I think if they do that and hold on to the football and take advantage of a defense that their goal is to get more turnovers in the second half while continuing to be a really good tackling team and tough against the run, I think Nebraska could do as much as 7 by the time we get to that first part of December.
Well, that's
optimistic.
It's
Schmidt.
optimistic. Yes, it is optimistic. And I'm going to lay out my grades here real fast just to kind of compare them to yours. I'm going to start out with the offense. And you gave him a C plus, correct?
Too generous?
I think it's a little generous. I'm sitting more
on D plus.
On the C minus.
Okay.
Because C minus is still passing.
Yeah, you got to retake the class.
Depends. No. Most of them, it's.
I did.
I thought D plus was retake the class. If you could skirt it up to a C minus, you were fine. I could be wrong there. I never really had to deal with many C's in my career. I had to throw that in there. C minus, though, simply put, the Husker offense hasn't won any of your 3 games that you've won this year. They've done enough to give your defense a chance to win. And
have they lost you some? They
have lost you some.
Yes, they have.
They haven't won you any. And you could make the argument they won you Northern Illinois, but hey, your defense only allowed 7 points against Northern Illinois. They did really well that game. You could say the same about the Illinois game, Louisiana Tech. Those are performances that your defense led the way in, and your offense did enough to go get the win in a game that you're probably expected to go out and win. So for that reason, I'll give him a C minus. There's still some issues with penalties, still lots of issues with turnovers. The red zone efficiency hasn't been good. The third down efficiency hasn't been good. I'm just going to be real and give him a C minus. That being said, I mean, the Iowas and Wisconsins of the world made a hell of a lot of bowl games with C minus to C offenses over the past 15 to 20 years.
Let's say D offenses.
Iowa was a D offense last year. D plus, D. We'll give it a D. They made a bowl game, though. And Nebraska can make a bowl game this year with the C minus offense. You wonder what they can get fixed during the bye week here. But what's nice is Nebraska, I'm agreeing with you. A B plus defense, I think, is a very fair rating. If they didn't lay such an egg against Michigan, which a lot of defenses are going to lay an egg against Michigan, that's how good Michigan is this year, I think you could be looking at that A minus category, maybe even an A category with how well that defense has been playing. The second half against Colorado and the Michigan game, I think, bring it down to a B+ for me. But that being said, your defense has given you a chance in every single game that you've played this year, aside from maybe the Michigan game. And again, as I said, Michigan's going to do that to a lot of people. I think you have to set that one to the side. And then special teams, hasn't been a detractor to your team thus far this year. Aside from the kicking game, but you went and got yourself an extra possession against Minnesota, and your tackling has been really solid on kickoff and your punt coverage as well. So it hasn't been a detractor. I'll give it a B. Hasn't been perfect. It hasn't been a big plus for you, but it hasn't been a minus either. And I think B is pretty middle of the road for that. There, I could see an argument for a B-, but that's what I'll lay it out. The defense gets a B+. Special teams gets a B- to a B, and the offense gets a C-.
Listen, you've seen development. You've seen guys that maybe you heard about in a recruiting signing day special get on the field and perform. You've seen some walk-ons wow because of development, because of usage. There are lots of choices on defense. They have won a couple of ball games or tried to get through a couple of ball games without Reimer, who's a big piece. You have Singleton that you want back, but they've survived a road game at Illinois without him. And you also have to look at the fact that you are seeing guys play at a level you've not seen them play before. That's Buda Wright, that's Nash Hutmacher, that's Nick Henrich. Just three that come to my mind defensively. Super impressive. We'll get Mike Babcock's thoughts from Hail Varsity next on this midterm report card.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Thanks for hanging out. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're powered by Hurrdat Sports. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Mike Babcock with us, Mr. Husker Football. Get your subscription with Babbers and his bi-weekly newsletter, Mike B at hurrdatsports.com. Get an email sent and get the history and the preview from Mike at MD Babs on Twitter. Mr. Babbers, got the old sun shining through in the football office. How you doing?
That's good. I was trying to think if I could have used Elijah's help on calculus, but I remember back when I was in high school, get out of the horse and carriage. And we didn't have calculus. I didn't take that till I was a freshman at York College.
Well, I love it, and
it should be noted that I made it through a semester of calculus and then dropped it for second semester. So I wasn't very good at it. That's why I had to get creative to make it through a couple of tests. That was not my cup of tea.
Well, let's dive in, Mike, as we've kind of laid out our grades. What overall do you give Nebraska? Do you give them anything higher than a C at 3-3, or do you take into context what they've gone through and that it is a year one and the way the year started?
Well, I would say a C overall, and those things that you mentioned would factor into my decision to give that grade. Mm-hmm. But, I think that this team had the capability to at least be 4-2 at this point. Mm-hmm. And possibly, I don't want to say beyond that. I think 4-2, what reasonably I could have expected this team to be. And some of the reason that it's C is because of the things that you said. Injuries play a part in it. First season plays a part in it. New system plays a part in it. But nonetheless, the overall grade, I take all of these things into consideration. I say C.
Okay. C's fair, and we'll get an outlook for the next six. But what are you encouraged with on this squad, with this football team? What's impressed you here through six?
Well, I've been impressed with if what Matt Rule has told us is correct, that the team has maintained its course despite the injuries, the problems that they've had. They've stayed the course. They've taken the approach, go 1-0 and improve each week. If that focus is really there, I think that's a positive. And I don't think you can ask for more in a first season under a new coach in a new system than if you maintain development. You get better each week. Despite the injuries, you overcome those things and you keep moving forward. That's the thing that has been a positive from my point of view. All we see is on the field and what Coach Rule tells us, but I think it's a work in progress, and I think this team is. I think development is the byword or the direction that they're going. The one question I have is, in this day and age with NIL and the transfer portal, can you develop a team? Can you bring players in with talent and develop them? Or if they're not getting an opportunity to play, are they going to get in the transfer portal and leave? And that's the one thing that would concern me about that. You probably have to do the same thing, get in the transfer portal and bring in guys.
It's Mike Babcock here with us, Hail Varsity Radio on a Wednesday. Mike joining us for his usual segment. And Mike, whenever you think about your mid-season report card, what do you think Nebraska can do with their grades? I guess whenever you get that report card back at the end of your first quarter of the school year, a lot of times kids sit down with the parents and say, all right, we need to get better here. You know what? We'll take a C+ here if you can get this grade to an A. What does Nebraska need to be by the end of the year? If you're sitting down with the Husker football
the art of
team
negotiation here.
and saying this is what it is, but we could really get a lot better here. I think you could put in some more hours studying. Where can Nebraska be better by the end of the year on your report card?
Well, I think the offense can be better on my report card, and my grade is probably in the range of where yours is, Elijah. I mean, C- is probably where I'm looking at it. And again, I'm taking into consideration, I'm probably dropping it a little bit because there have been injuries and you have to play through those things. But I think the offense can be better. I think you've got an opportunity in the second half of the season, particularly with the first 3 games of the second half, to put yourself in a position to be bowl eligible. That's the thing. I think for the long range, bowl eligibility is what is the expectation for this team. That's what it needs to be. And whether that's 6-6 or 7-5, and I tend to think it's going to be 6-6 if you get to that point. It's going to rely on some improvement on the offensive side of the ball, because I think that you're getting a good deal out of your defense. I don't know that you can get a whole lot more out of this defense. And you've got, Singleton now, he's gone. Reimer hasn't been playing because he's been hurt. You've had some things on defense as well that you've had to deal with. But I think that the defense has been pretty good. I think the special teams can be better. But I see it reflected in the record, the potential to be 6-6. And it has to happen, I think, fairly quickly, because the last 3 games are more of a challenge, obviously, than the first 3 in that last 6.
Mike Babcock's with us from Hail Varsity at MD Babs on Twitter. Mike, do you worry about the defense wilting down the stretch as much as they've done lifting-wise already?
No, I don't, because I see very committed guys. And, again, if you can get a little bit of improvement on the offense and you're not turning the ball over and you're not putting the defense back out on the field as much, you have an opportunity to continue, I think, playing at a pretty high level. In order for Nebraska, again, to get to that goal, that bowl game thing, the defense has to be able to hold up, I think. And I think it will. I think it will, unless the offense is turning the ball over and putting the defense back out there time after time after time.
Mike, whenever you look at the first 6 games, are you willing to give me an offensive and defensive MVP from your first 6? I think there's some good candidates defensively. Offensively, maybe not as much in terms of an MVP candidate, but who do you have right now? And as a follow-up to that, do you think those MVP candidates will remain the same by the end of the year?
defensively, I would have a hard time picking one person because I think that, that's the point is it's a team effort. And I think you're getting good play from a lot of guys on that defense. And I wouldn't pick one out because I think that that's not the way the defense needs to play. The offense, it sounds like I'm avoiding your question. I'm really not in my mind. I'm not, but it probably comes across that way. I don't know that I've seen anybody consistently step up on offense to the point where I can say, yeah, this guy is, he's really getting the job done. Hoiberg has come in and he's done some good things. I think it's still a learning thing for him. I think that if Sims were 100% healthy and able to go, I think we'd see some of him, and we may down the line. But it would be hard for me to pick out one person on offense to say that consistently from game one to where we are now has consistently gotten the job done for the offense. I think it's a work in progress, for sure.
Mike, going to switch up and get some thoughts on Husker basketball. Fred Hoiberg, couple minutes here before we got to say goodbye. But Hoiberg in Minneapolis yesterday and his Big Ten Media Days. And do you feel like Fred's excited? I mean, Coach has got to act excited, but I think the level of excitement heading into year 5 seems pretty genuine with what he's got.
Yeah, I believe that. I think he is excited. I'm still going through the roster trying to learn names of the new players and how things fit. And I know that Tominaga, the fact that he's back, that's a great thing for the team. But I think Coach Hoiberg is really excited about the potential for what this team can do. And I think it can be very competitive. I mean, I'm expecting that. That's my belief. That's where my expectation is. But I guess at this time of year, I'm like everybody else. I have high expectations. But if you're reflecting off the coach, there's reason to be optimistic. Same way with Amy Williams and the women's team. There's reasons for a lot of optimism there, I think, and looking forward to seeing how things go in both of these situations.
Mike, is it a make-or-break year for Fred Hoiberg and the Husker basketball squad with just how long he's been around? Is it the kind of year where you need either a really deep run in the NIT or an NCAA tournament appearance? What's at stake this year for Husker basketball, do you think?
Yeah, I don't have a good sense of that. I would say no. I think that if Trev Alberts believes that he has the right guy, I don't think he's going to put that kind of pressure on Fred Hoiberg. We certainly aren't going to feel it now. If he goes through the season and they have a losing record and, things go downhill, possibly you'd look at that. But no, I don't see that going into the season. I don't think that's a factor.
Mike, what's coming up from you, bud, with the newsletter?
Well, I wrote one this week because there is no game, but got to get busy on the kind of historical perspective on the Northwestern series. Thinking about that catch that Jordan Westerkamp made on the Hail Mary thrown by Ron Kellogg. The third, that seems to stand out.
10 years, man. It's in 10 years. Believe it?
Yeah. How about that?
Wow.
That was quite the play. Hard to believe, isn't it?
Can you believe I was a freshman in high school?
Well, I feel old
You
now.
were taking a horse and carriage to high school.
I hadn't even made it to calculus class at that point.
That's
that was
good.
still a couple years away.
And Babbers, to his point, was like, forget calculus. I love it. Mike, you be good, and thanks for giving us a few minutes today.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Appreciate him. There he is, Mr. Husker Football, Mike Babcock, and get that subscription to him. Mike B. at HurrdatSports.com.
Hail Varsity Radio is live. Now, back to Schmitty.
Schmitty's a great guy, but he don't have a brain.
And Elijah.
You want me to speak? When I point at you, yeah.
On Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, it's Hail Varsity Radio. We're powered by Hurrdat Sports. Big thanks to Mike Babcock. Get the podcast now, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. The segments you want, the entire show you like, and go with it that way. Hail Varsity YouTube channel also. We'll get to some of the stream comments. And a reminder to get buckled up using your seatbelt. It saves lives. It prevents injuries only if properly worn. Buckle up. A message from the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. Anonymous has sent us a calculus equation. God love him. And has thoughts for 2021, right? We talked about Nebraska having this moment in time with a lot of seasons. They all kind of run together, but what do you do at that 500 mark? Can you go the right way in that fork in the road? 2021 with this schedule in 2023 could have gone 8-4, 10-2, with every win a blowout and every close game a loss. And that's what we're going to get into is just kind of the expectations and projections for the second half. Enjoy the journey. I know Coach Rule touched on that. We're going to look ahead a little bit here and what's the potential for 2023, this second half of the season. And if you talk to folks that are plugged in with your friends in the desert, I mean, you've got this range of favored by 3 or maybe a little bit more, but nothing too crazy double-digit wise. Or you're dogged by nothing too crazy double-digit wise. You're talking between 3 and 7 points. You're either favored or dogged, probably favored in your next 2. I think I've seen that early posting anyway, where you're favored over Northwestern, you're favored over Purdue, and you might even be favored over Michigan State or getting +2, which is still kind of favored if you think it getting 3 points at home, which is what Sparty would get. Wisconsin, Iowa, Maryland, different story. But that is as you get into a little bit thicker November. All right, if I'm going to pick a breakout guy or a guy to emerge, he did it in the first half, and he's going to be vital for this offense in the second half, is going to be Thomas Fidone. If I'm going to give an MVP nod so far, it has been Hoiberg at quarterback. And I know it's not been perfect. It's not been beautiful all the time. But I think the toughness and the get her done has been very real with this offense. So that's who I'd give it to right now on offense. Defensively, I say give me Nash because of how well Nebraska's been. And it's been Nash and everybody. It's been a team effort on defense. It's been kind of one group versus one guy, and I totally agree with Mike Babcock. But if I'm picking a person, it's going to be Nash with how he set the tone in the middle, came up huge, clearly with his brute force on the interior. He's a big reason Nebraska's been so good against the run, and I like Nash. I think Gifford has played really good football as well, and those are kind of the two candidates I have for my MVP. And as far as breakout goes, I'm a little torn, but I think you could see a guy like Lenhart really catch some fire after a really good early start, got sidetracked with the injury, and I think he could really have a big second half. He'll need to against Maryland, and he'll need to with what Purdue has on offense. I mean, they're not what they've been under Braum, but they're going to still throw the football around. So Nebraska's pass rush is going to be important.
Okay, now I got to go find my the offensive MVP, as Mike kind of said. Yeah, there's not
0.0, Mr. Blutarski.
Doesn't feel like there's any right answers there. So let's start defensively. I'll get to offense here.
You start with the positives.
I'll start with the positives. Defensively, a guy who I think has been the MVP quietly under the radar, which I think is a really big sign at that position, has been Quentin Newsome. You don't see the ball getting thrown Quentin Newsome's way all that often.
He's just great.
He's just really, really good, and that's why you see guys like Hartzog, and whenever Tommy Hill comes in, they've been targeted a good amount, because I think what you're seeing is Quentin Newsome's really locking down his man, locking down his side of the field. I mean, the worst game Newsome had was probably Colorado, and even then I remember off the top of my head, I think it was 3 completions he allowed that game, 3 or 4, and that was probably the worst game that I remember him playing. So I'm going to go with Newsome being my guy defensively. Hutmacher's a great choice. I don't think you can go wrong between those two. And then the breakout guy defensively that I have seen that you'd like to see back sooner rather than later has been Deshaun Singleton.
Amen.
He has been fantastic at that back end through the first 6 games, and there's a lot of concerns with Miles Farmer leaving the squad right before the season started, and you go, what's Nebraska going to do? Well, Singleton has stepped in and stepped up and been, I think, playing better this year than we've seen from Miles Farmer in recent years, and you don't know what Miles Farmer is going to be this year, but Singleton has been a breath of fresh air at that back end. He's been my breakout guy. You hope you can have him back. If not, I love the Cam Linhart answer, and then Prince will as well, depending on his injury status as well. He's been really, really good off the edge as a pass rusher. So I think you have a lot of breakout candidates for the last 6 games on that defensive side of the ball. But what I've seen thus far, assuming he gets back from injury sooner rather than later, Singleton's your breakout guy defensively. Offensively, I think your breakout guy is Fedoni, not your MVP. I think he's your breakout candidate through 6, and looking at the back half of the schedule, he's going to have to step up big time and be a pass-catching threat in the back 6 games, because I think you're going to be putting a lot on those freshmen. And could one of those freshman wide receivers step up and be a breakout guy? Yeah, but based on what we've seen through 6, I don't think they're the most likely candidates. I think whatever you can get from those guys is going to be a plus, and you want those guys to be all set to go for next year. I think Fedoni is going to be a guy. Offensive MVP, and actually I'll add one more. You hope it's not a great breakout candidate answer, but based on what we've seen this year, Grant, if he can have a breakout type back 6 games, final 6 games compared to what we've seen in the first 6, that'd be good things for the offense. Not sure how likely that is. Emmett Johnson, I guess, falls in that same category. You just need one of the backs to step up over the past 6 games. Fleeks works too. But then you get to the MVP offensively. And I sit back.
You can say, I don't have one, and that's fine. That's no fun. But
I think you've seen Ethan Piper come on. I don't think he's been your best offensive player, but I think he's probably been your best offensive line with what he can do in space. And I think there's also that factor of playing next to a guy in Corcoran, and I don't mean to bemoan Corcoran, but you got a tough job whenever you got a guy who is really struggling at that left tackle spot. It makes your job as a left guard a little bit more difficult. So maybe I'll go with Piper. He's been steady at that left guard spot. Hasn't been perfect, but he's at least been steady, and you can see what he does whenever he gets out, and he's the lead blocker pulling in space. He's been very, very good there. So Piper is a candidate, and then maybe you go to Hoiberg, but I don't think anything about Hoiberg's performance has been MVP worthy. It's just he's come in and steadied the ship at the quarterback spot.
I think he's made some plays. He's not made every play, but he's made enough plays with what he's been asked to do that can get him better.
And I think Brandon actually has a great, we have Cutter's comment on screen. Brandon says Marcus Washington has been an offensive MVP
That's a great take.
candidate.
It's too bad he's out.
It's hard to put him down now knowing he's not going to be in the last 6 games. But yeah, sure, actually, Marcus Washington maybe has been your best offensive player.
Well, Cutter chimes in, says the Nebraska's headed in the right direction, have to continue to develop the talent and keep them at Nebraska. Totally agree. Downfall of Frost was retention, rate of players, worse than the Big Ten. That's the formula. Got to keep dudes here, and you got to get them better. Mike's point was incredible with, in today's portal era, are you going to get kids to stick around long enough to play? And that key timeline is your redshirt freshman year. What are you doing by year 2? We'll wind down hour 1. It's Hail Varsity.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time this first hour, Hail Varsity continues. Evan Bland with us in 10 minutes. His take on Nebraska. He also had a chance to catch up with Prince Amukamara a couple weeks ago, so we'll check in with Evan Bland. We'll hear from Fred Hoiberg here at 5:20. Get the mayor's take from Media Days as his outlook for Nebraska basketball. 489-1240, 489-1240. YouTube channel, Hail Varsity, or the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed at HVarsityRadio. Jim emails in, Chris@HailVarsity.com. Does Nebraska have anyone that's first team all Big Ten on either side?
No.
And no is the answer on offense, and I think I just blew my computer up, so I'll work on that. I could say there's some second or third team potential, and maybe if there's a monster second half of the season for Newsome and for Nash, they could work their way into first team. But I mean, you've got your usual suspects with Ohio State and what you have with what Penn State's doing on their lines of scrimmage. I mean, it's going to be primarily your three big dogs from the East. As far as a first-team All-Big Ten quarterback, right now it's little Tua from a numbers standpoint, I would think, or McCarthy. And I know there's still a lot of question marks about McCarthy. How great is he? But, dude, I was watching highlights of him, and they're not asking him to make tough throws. That ain't his fault. He's just been damn accurate with the football. And I look at Nebraska in the second half, passing-wise, you can throw 4-yard passes and get 12 with some yak yards.
Well, look at the NFL with Brock Purdy. Does Brock Purdy make many difficult throws? No, but he delivers accurately on time and gets the ball to his playmakers in space with a chance for them to make plays. And some of that comes down to scheme. Some of that comes down to the playmakers the 49ers have. But let's not act like a lot of NFL teams out there wouldn't like to have Brock Purdy. He doesn't make difficult throws. No, but he doesn't have to. That's not the kind of quarterback they need within that offense, and that's not the kind of quarterback Michigan needs. Could you ask McCarthy to do more and see how it goes? Yeah, sure, but that's probably not your best chance to win. So.
Well, Nebraska is asking their quarterback to be a pretty valued part of the run game, and Nebraska has that right now in Hoiberg. And that is something that's been big for this offense, as limited as it's been. His ability to run some options been pretty key, and that's something that can maybe get better in the second half of the year. What are you thinking right now? Are you thinking 4-2, 2-4, 3-3 for the second half?
Right now, I think 3-3 is reasonable. The question becomes if Nebraska gets to that Maryland game and they only have 5 wins.
Well, you need to sweep. You need to be 3-0 going into Maryland,
and that's easier said than done. I think based on where Nebraska's been over the past couple years, where it looks to me like they're at right now, I think 2-1 is reasonable. Mm-hmm. And the question to me to get into bowl eligible is, can you sting one of Maryland, Wisconsin, or Iowa? I think Iowa might be your best shot, followed by Maryland and then Wisconsin after that. I think that's what this year might come down to. And imagine if Nebraska's sitting at 5-6 on Black Friday against Iowa at home. That would be a fun game, one of the most fun games in recent memory for Husker football. So we'll see what happens there. But to get back to your original point about first-team all-conference type honors at the end of the year, the standard in the Big Ten is if you're going to be first-team all-Big Ten, you need to be a first- or second-day guy at the NFL draft. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how many of those guys Nebraska has right now. I got a lot of mid-round guys, especially defensively, but that's the question. Can someone differentiate themselves as being a day 1 or day 2 draft pick? That's what Nebraska needs to get first-team All-Big Ten.
Get a couple of guys on that first, second, or third-team offensive line in the near future. Evan Bland on the way.
The voice of Husker Nation is on the air. This is Hail Varsity Radio. Insight, opinion, expertise, along with the biggest names talking Nebraska sports. Join in with the show at 402-489-1240 or 1-800-825-5865. Now, here are your hosts, Chris Schmidt and Elijah Herbel.
Hour 2's here at Hail Varsity Radio. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. We're powered by Hurrdat Sports. Evan Bland back with us from the Omaha World Herald. Follow him on Twitter at Evan Bland OWH. Evan, good day for baseball, man. How we doing?
Yeah, doing all right. A little rain earlier, but the last little local baseball game of the year, can't complain.
Yeah, I'm not sure good day for baseball is the verbiage I'd use for
He's
today.
Outside at a baseball game. It's wonderful.
That's fair. Baseball game in October. It's good baseball weather for October.
Sure.
I think if we qualify it.
Right. The fall is where you want to be ultimately in baseball. So, Evan, we'll dive into some football here, get some thoughts on Husker baseball, and talk about the other Prince in just a moment. But want to get your take here, mid-season point with Nebraska. I know you were up in Champaign and got a chance to see with Nebraska's bounce-back win against the Illini. Beyond that, though, we've kind of dove into some grades and some projections with this Nebraska football team. A different path to 3-3, but it could be worse, and it feels like there's some momentum right now with Nebraska football opposed to past opportunities when Nebraska's sat at 500 at different points of different seasons.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, especially the way they started the year at 0-2, you kind of wondered how they'd bounce back, and they've actually, with the exception of that Michigan game, been pretty good. And so I think if you would have said in August that they'd be 3-3 at this point, I think that's about right. Maybe you'd swap out Minnesota or Colorado for Illinois, but I think the record's probably what you're looking at. I still think this stretch, starting with Northwestern and Purdue and Michigan State, still looks awfully manageable, probably is the best way to phrase it, moving forward here. But yeah, I mean, I think you want to start with maybe the offense. Like, everyone is aware of the injuries that they've gone through at this point and how limited they are. But I think in the big picture, they've achieved what they wanted to achieve, and that's finding an identity. And that's something that Nebraska really hasn't had in a number of years. And Matt Rule can articulate it. I think we can articulate it. It's body blows, it's commitment to the run, take the occasional deep shot downfield, and then try to win on third downs and win the turnovers. And that's been a recipe that's kept them in most games to this point. I think that's what their recipe is going to be moving forward. So that's, I would say, a win. And then defensively, really there's no doubt about it. They're ahead of schedule from what maybe most anticipated going in. They're playing more players. Some of the guys in that second wave, I think, are really coming along, whether that's Mekhi Bayer or Riley Van Poppel or Phelan Sanford has stepped into that role from Deshaun Singleton. So I think there's a ton of positives in that regard as well. And again, I think you got to go back to what was the outlook of this team coming in, and that was 6-6-ish, make a bowl game, build on that, develop. And I think from that regard, Nebraska is right on track for where it wants to be.
Evan, how do you kind of grade it when we talk the curve being an onslaught of injuries with a key departure at wide receiver in Betts? You tack in the injuries, you tack in the quarterback situation, you tack in the inconsistency in the turnovers. You do all that math, and it's kind of hard, you could argue, to believe you're 3-3.
Right. I mean, from a grade standpoint, I'd give it an incomplete, because it's hard to say. Like, what would this group look like if it had, Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda and Xavier Betts on the outside, if it had Gabe Ervin and Ramir Johnson, if Arik Gilbert had stuck around and found his way onto the field? Like, what would it all look like? We don't really know. And we know that this is an offense that 2 months ago was not practicing running the option, and that's what they've done at times to figure it out and to stay competitive and win games. And so, I think at this point you got to do what you got to do. And I've said, I think on this show too, like, the quarterback situation, in my opinion, is informed by what the defense has done. And so if you thought going into the year that the defense would take some time, then you want more of a high upside quarterback who can generate some quick points. But I think as we've gone along, we've kind of found that there's more value in more of a high floor guy, and that's what Hoiberg has provided, where he has taken care of the football. He's managed the game well. He's gone through his reads. Maybe he's a tick less explosive than what Jeff Sims is with his arm or with his legs. But I think he's fit into what the identity, again, of this program is right now in terms of finding a way to win those games. So, are they going to win any shootouts? No. I don't think there's anyone who's under that delusion. But I think one of the storylines of the second half is going to be, how does that next wave of players take advantage of this opportunity? Are we going to look back in a year or two at guys like Malachi Coleman or Jalen Lloyd or Jaden Doss and say, man, that second half of 2023 was when they took off and got some game reps, and that really sped up the offense for what it could be in the future. Like, that, to me, is one of the more interesting elements of this thing, is you certainly hate to see anybody go down. You feel for those guys on a personal level, but it does sort of kickstart the development of that next wave of guys who have come in under this Matt Rule staff, and we'll see how they're able to handle it here right away the rest of the way.
It's Evan Bland with us here from the Omaha World Herald, Hail Varsity Radio. And Evan, whenever you talk about kind of that development with the young guys, What are you going to be watching for over the last half of the year to see if this year one is a foundational year for Nebraska in terms of moving forward? Because I go back to Scott Frost's first year, and I don't want to bring up Frost too much. I say that every single time I bring up Frost probably, but he came off the bye week and then finished his year 3-2, and one of those losses was a close loss to a very good Ohio State team. The other loss, a close loss to a pretty good Iowa team that year. And a lot of Husker fans felt like Nebraska was getting better week in, week out, and they were taking steps in the right direction. And in year 2, it's a disappointing season, and that excitement fell away. And I want to get your thoughts on how you can quantify over the last 6 games here the development that Nebraska's making and the strides Nebraska's making. What are you going to be watching for to see if this team is getting better in a way that's going to set the foundation for year 2, year 3, and beyond?
Well, I think what it starts with for me is not apologizing for how you win games. Like, just figure it out and find a way to get those 3. Because if you win 3 more and you're 6-6, or maybe you win 7, there's going to be a lot of excitement and a lot of momentum, and that means you're doing something positive moving forward. And I think the Illinois game was a great example of that. Where did they play perfect? No. Did they play above average? Maybe not, quite honestly. I mean, they were okay, but there were a lot of self-inflicted wounds. The 2 fumbles in the red zone, they did not play a perfect game, but they figured out a way to win. And to me, that's a huge step forward, because how many times in that Illinois game was there a mistake made where you thought, boy, this looks familiar, and here we go again, and this is where the thing slips away, and it didn't. And I think that's a step in the right direction for this team that, as Matt Rule likes to say, is still learning how to win. So I think that's what the second half is about, is learning how to win. And do you have to do it? Maybe you have to do it by running more of the option and being unconventional with your offense. Do you do it by continuing to rotate 20-plus guys defensively? Probably. So, I think that's where it starts, is just find a way to win. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what it's going to look like for Nebraska in a year or 2. But, man, think back, how long has it been since Nebraska's gone into an off-season for football where there's been genuine excitement and where you kind of wish the season would have kept going because they were just getting on a heater? I mean, you probably got to go back to Frost's first year in 2018 down the stretch when they nearly beat Iowa, and it just felt like that offense was taking the Big Ten by storm. But, the last decade, I mean, there's only been a couple of times really where you feel like, man, I wish the season would have kept going because they were so much fun to watch and there was so much energy going. So I think if you can achieve that in year 1, given where this program has been, man, that's a huge win heading into the offseason, which is another big, obviously, stretch for development and recruiting.
Evan Bland with us, Omaha World Herald, Hail Varsity Radio, at Evan Bland, OWH. You just said it, man, and that's so many Nebraska fans nodding right now when you put the outlook in one hand and the either make it stop or, man, I hope this thing keeps going. There's been so many draining, exhausting, disappointing seasons. If you can get it flipped and keep on the path and get to a bowl game, it'll be absolutely a success. And you're right. You said something just a minute ago about not apologizing for a win, and I think part of the frustration has been that self-infliction, or a lot of the frustration has been because it could have been less of a stress test. and that's one thing I'm looking forward to in the second half. I love the young guys on defense. I love how well they tackle. I mean, it sounds simple, but they're a party to watch, man, and they fly around. Offensively, they've absolutely had to go John Wayne time and just make do, and I think you can appreciate that. With just finding ways to make it happen, and if it can kind of come together and they can keep chugging, there's absolutely some wins on this schedule. But you just wonder about Nebraska continuing to get in their own way, and when we talk about Rule and again highlighting the turnovers and the fumbles, do you believe that gets corrected in the second half?
Well, the last 6 or 7 years of Nebraska history would say no. But I mean, it can, sure. I mean, Matt Rule talked at length about Anthony Grant in particular on Tuesday, just, 5-pointing the football, keeping that tip in so it's not able to get jarred loose as easily by defenders. Like, you can coach a lot of that. But as Rule said, Grant was a guy who, carried the ball a certain way for his entire life. And so you've been doing that for 15 or 20 years. Sometimes that, especially in the moment, you're going to revert to what you know. So that's something that they're continuing to work with him on. I don't think it's really been much of an issue for Hoiberg. I mean, he had the strip sack against Northern Illinois to start. He had the deep pass intercepted by Illinois that kind of functioned more as a punt. But you don't really look at his situation as being too troublesome necessarily. So I think you got to cut down on some of the fumbles for sure. And then when you talk about turnover margin, I still think that's the next step for this defense. As good as it's been, it hasn't generated those takeaways. And, as bad as the margin has been, a lot of the takeaways the defense has had have come in garbage time, late against Colorado. I believe it was late against Louisiana Tech as well. And really, the Illinois game was the first time since the opener at Minnesota where there were some key takeaways in moments that ended up swinging the game. So I think that's the next step. As good as this defense has been about getting stops, getting off the field on third down, defending the run, that's sort of the next thing, and it's accentuated by the fact that the offense could really use a little bit of extra help, right? Like if you can, instead of even forcing a punt, like if you can set up the offense on the plus 40 or the opponent's 35 or something, that can be huge down the stretch in some of these games where I think, again, the line for Nebraska in the second half of most of these games is going to be a single score. And so even one or two of those plays could end up swinging a game and swinging how we view what Nebraska has been at the end of the season.
It's Evan Bland with us here, Hail Varsity Radio. And Evan, whenever you look at the final 6 games on the schedule, if Nebraska is to get to 6 wins in 2023, can you give me a couple guys, 2 or 3, that need to step up and play better than they did in the first 6 games? I mean, we kind of talk about the freshmen making the next step or some of those young guys. Who are some guys specifically, whenever you take into account the competition Nebraska is going to be playing, that need to step up in order for Nebraska to get to that 6-win mark?
I mean, I think it's mostly on the offense, to be honest with you. I think Anthony Grant, as we just discussed, like if he can hold on to the ball, like the opportunity is right there in front of him, right? Like it's him and it's Josh Fleeks, a converted receiver. It's Emmett Johnson, who's a young player, and then Quentin Ives, who they like long term, but maybe not necessarily this year as he gets up to speed with the playbook. So I think he's a guy Nebraska wants and needs to be a workhorse, but you have to be able to trust him. You have to have him secure that ball. And if he can do that, I mean, as he's shown, and we saw it last year, like the playmaking ability that he has, just the toughness, I think that's somebody that you're going to rely on in the second half. From a receiver standpoint, I still think there's more out there for Billy Kemp. I mean, he had a bit of a slow start. Not all of it necessarily his fault with targets and things like that, but you've seen what he did at Virginia, nearly 200 career receptions there. He's not the kind of guy who's going to take the top off of a defense, but he can find pockets, and if you can get him the ball in space, he can make things happen. So I think it starts off with some of these skill guys that Nebraska's going to need to rely on because, again, the further we go into this thing, the more obvious it becomes to opposing defenses that you're going to stack the box, make sure Hoiberg stays in the pocket, and then you just dare him to beat you through the air. And so I think Nebraska still has players that can make those plays, but maybe they haven't shown it to this point yet. So I'm looking at a lot of those skill guys in particular. Maybe the offensive line can take a half step up. I think they've been an improvement from last year as well. But I think there's some talent there. It just needs to emerge when Nebraska needs it in key spots.
Evan, real quick, bud, about 30 seconds. A thought from you on your chat with Prince Amukamara as you caught up with him during Michigan.
Well, he was fun. I mean, a lot going on in his life as a retired NFL player. I would encourage people to read the story about some of his experiences in the last 10 years. But I thought the thing that was most relevant to today's Nebraska program was just the reminder that, Prince was still Nebraska's last first-round NFL draft pick in 2011. But his path to Nebraska was as a 3-star athlete who changed from a prep running back to a corner. And so I think he pointed that out as something that, that's something Nebraska needs to continue to do and do more frequently if it wants to develop players and get back to where it wants to be as far as nationally relevant.
Evan Bland with us. Evan, enjoy the Huskers, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, guys.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you. Hail Varsity rolls forward. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. Can find the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Hail Varsity YouTube channel, Hail Varsity Radio, Twitter. Give that a follow at HVarsity Radio. And big thanks to Evan Bland for squeezing us in. I don't know if I got to get one of those ring things for even in studio or what, but
I was saying yesterday, you just have a bad backdrop. You don't want it to be lit from behind, and it's kind of tough in this studio based on where that window is and how we need to be able to see each other. For the people that aren't on the video feed, Schmitty and I, there's glass in between us to not only keep me safe, but to keep Schmitty safe.
And I don't blame you for not wanting to look at me.
But we also want to be face-to-face, and to do that, there's a window directly behind Schmitty, the blinds behind
Maybe
it.
I can just change spots, but I'm kind of hunkered down
I
here.
think blackout curtains is the way to go. I've been saying it. I think if you get blackout curtains, it'll help a lot.
Elijah's going to show up with a leather apron and utensils. Might as well just make it a little bit creepy this October. Dion chimes in. Our offense will not get any better without better players. Well played, Dion. There's been a lot of hype. Well, hype's probably the wrong word. A lot of belief that there are really good players on this team. They're just young. You've seen it emerge defensively with some snaps and some impact. And now that's part of the intrigue of the second half of the season, right?
And
is these young wideouts that they're really high on, but do they do what they're supposed to do? Do they know what they're supposed to know? And you just got to kind of make it work like you've done with the rest of the offense. You're forced to do it now.
And I don't mean to for this to come off poorly against Dion, but yeah, of course, if you want your team to be better, you need better players. It's just how do you want to go about doing that? Do you want to do it in the transfer portal, or do you want to do it through development? Those are the two ways you
got to
get
be able
better
to
players.
lean on development, and you got to find the right kids that'll stick and stay to be developed. That comes back into your evaluation.
And in the evaluation,
also,
you have to evaluate the ceiling of a player. Whenever you look at Nebraska's current starting 11 on the field on Saturdays, what is the ceiling of those guys in terms of their development? You assume a guy like Thomas Fidone. I mean, there's question marks with the injury, but you assume that the sky is the limit whenever you compare him to a guy like Nate Borgacher. That's nothing against Nate Borgacher because he's filled his role well this year, but the athletic potential of a guy like Fidone probably means a higher ceiling. You're more willing to put in the legwork for development on Fidone than you would be some other guys in that offense. And that's going to be the question with Matt Rule over the final 6 games is what guys do you think you can develop through the offseason and be key pieces next year, and where do you need to go to the portal? Where do you need a younger guy that hasn't got much playing time to step up? These are all the questions the coaching staff is working through, but yeah, obviously you need better players if you want to have a better offense. That's pretty obvious. It's just a question of how do you want to get those better players.
Well, and the other part of it too is, I mean, it's evaluation in the portal, it's evaluation in high school or JUCO. And you just got to keep them here to get better. I'll say this, you've not had much ROI on your portal investment. Nebraska went after some guys from named programs, and while they're contributing, they're not starring. They're not wow guys right now. There's still a second half of football left for them to do it. Let's get into some Husker basketball. Fred Hoiberg in Minneapolis yesterday. A little bit from Fred here, as that's just around the corner. I'm not in basketball mode yet. I'm going to lie to you. I'm excited for it. I can't wait to cover this Nebraska basketball team. We'll obviously keep an eye on Creighton as well, because there's high expectations for the Jays. But overall, Fred laid out what he believes. Well,
would you feel like you were in more of a basketball mood if Nebraska would have dropped that game to Illinois last week?
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. You slammed the door. Here's what the reality is. If Nebraska would have lost to Illinois, people would be done with the season.
Oh yeah, you'd be in baseball mode.
Yeah, they were teetering anyway, and I don't blame you from a frustration standpoint. But they lose to Illinois, and they're at 2-4. You're out. Talk to me in spring. Talk to me about football in the spring or what's happening in December recruiting wise. Here's Coach Hoiberg, who's put together a portal roster of some buff dudes in the paint, and Fred really likes this group.
Just first of all, talk about our group this year. Really enjoyable group to coach, top to bottom. It's a team that comes to compete every day. we had a really unique opportunity this summer with a lot of new faces to go to Spain and have a very good trip with a foreign trip you can do once every 4 years, and just really excited about our group. And it makes our job a lot easier as coaches when you have a team that comes prepared to work every day and competes every time they step on the floor.
So that's Fred Hoiberg, a little bit on this group he has. So the topic now is momentum. Nebraska ended last season playing good basketball, kind of ran out of time, ran out of wins. And he thinks they're could have been a tournament team, but a little bit longer piece here.
Yeah, this is 4.5 minutes. Is that right?
Is that what it says?
It says 4.5 minutes.
Do we want to do that?
I don't think so.
No. We'll after hours session of Hail Varsity Radio may have that posted.
We'll have to pull up the video afterwards because I know I had a great look on my face when I saw 4.5 minutes there.
I'm sorry about that.
I thought that was
edited down. Well, how about we move forward to blending old pieces with some of these new parts he's brought in?
It's a very mature group, and it's a team that, I think last year's group really set the culture that we needed and really flipped it with Griesel, with Bandamel, with Derek Walker, all being older players. And we've got a very mature group of guys. And, I can't tell you exactly who the one leader of this team is, but it's a team that certainly is led by committee, has been a committee-led team. And as far as blending them together, I mean, it's what our sport is right now, is with the portal, with bringing in as many new faces as we do. But again, when you look at the amount of games that our players have played and started, we've got a lot of guys that have started at a high level, and you bring those guys together with the players that they're integrated with, because you have a culture set. Those guys have come in and really, kind of taken it to the next level. I think this is, again, a mature group that I've ever had, certainly at Nebraska, even going back to my days at Iowa State. So, it's a team that I think will battle through adversity, similar to last year's team. When you have two starters in the middle of the year that go out, you have to have a good culture in order to fight through that adversity. And I think this team is built the same way.
So Hoiberg talking about what he has, how he's wanted to build, kind of relates back to football, because that's a lot of the work Coach Rule put in first with his football team. And despite all the injuries, might be an answer as to why they're at least 3-3 through all of this, is the culture that's been built.
The culture and the acceptance that guys on that team have within their role, I think, is really important too. You look at the tight end room, Nate Borgacher could be a guy based on the year he had last year and saying, I need the ball more. I need more looks over the middle. He's accepted his role as more of a blocking tight end. You know what, Fedoni? He's a guy that's more of a threat in the passing game, and you don't hear, or at least publicly, you don't hear Nate Borgacher complaining about his role within the offense.
Borgacher does his job, and you've also seen Fedoni get really physical when he's been asked to block. And it's not a situation where, yeah, dude, we're going to put you in and just throw you the football. Well, yeah, but you also got to seal that edge, and he likes taking people out when he's asked to block, and he's become really pretty good at that. I mean, there's not any splash Ethan Piper moments yet of Fedoni, but he has spiked some dudes with that hand-to-hand combat on the edge blocking. So I think both guys have transitioned, to your point, with that off role, or what would you rather be doing versus what you're asked to be doing.
And you see it on the same way defensively as well, with defensive backs being willing to come up and make some plays, take on some blocks, do the dirty work that's going to allow you to get better run fits for your defense. Like, you know what? Quentin Newsom and Deshaun Singleton, they're coming up and exactly, as you said, setting the edge and taking on a block. That's not what defensive backs want to do. Defensive backs want to go get interceptions or turn it to the house and get all the headlines. But you know what? The coaching staff trusts you if you can go accept your role and say, I have to set the edge on this play. And you know what? I don't want to take on this 6'6", 330-pound pulling guard, but I have to because it's what the team needs from me. It's an important part of not just being a football team or a basketball team, being on a team sport in general, being able to accept your role and carrying it out at a very high level.
Well, Fred gets into that. Fred Hoiberg, some comments from him at Big Ten Media Days. Deep roster and some talent on the roster, but that whole buy-in and role acceptance, we've talked about it with football here for a moment. Fred lays it out for basketball this upcoming season.
That is going to be a challenge, but it's a good challenge, for us, and a good problem to have is when you have great depth. And, our big thing right now is figuring out the rotation. We had our first inter-squad scrimmage of fall camp last week, and we're going to have another one on Thursday. And, that's where you figure out who's going to be in your rotation. And early on, the rotation may not be the same as it is as you go throughout the year, how the certain players respond to pressure situations on the court. I'm really mixing the teams pretty much on a daily basis to see who fits with each other. The one thing that I think you'll see with this team with the depth is we're going to have a lot of different combinations we can put on the floor. We can play smaller, more skilled lineups, but we can also play big and I think have a chance to be a team that can punish some people, especially on the glass, which we have not had that at my time in Nebraska. But if you throw a lineup out there with Bryce Williams, Jawan Gary, Josiah Alec, Rink Mass, you're going to have a huge group out there that all have a level of physicality to them. So that's the challenge right now, is figuring out, not only who starts, which I really could care less about, but more importantly, who's going to finish the game for us. And, again, I keep throwing the word mature out, but it is a mature group, and we talk a lot about role acceptance. And whatever role you have to shine and star in that role, and I'm confident our guys will do that.
Well put by Fred Hoiberg, and easier said than done, but that's part of the coaching part and having the right guys, specifically the philosophy. Fred was asked about that to end his public time at Big Ten Media Days. How do you pick who you go after for and who can fit on this team?
I talked a lot to our staff about the types of players that we want, the types of players that the Nebraska fan base can get behind. And I talked a lot early in the process last year of that team was going to be a very enjoyable team to watch. And had we stayed healthy, I honestly think we had a chance to be a tournament team last year. And, we had Derek Walker out for the first 5 and then had a really good stretch when we had our starters together after the injuries, went through a tough stretch and then finished the year out really strong. But it was a team, I think, every time we stepped on the floor, our fan base could rally behind because of how hard they played, diving after balls, taking charges, really had a defensive identity early in the season with the group that went out there and played with a great toughness to them. So when you talk to your staff about identifying those types of players, I think, I give our staff a lot of credit for going out there and finding the right guys that are going to continue on with making this fan base very proud. So, now it's about taking the next step. I know it's an important year. It's getting into the postseason and having a chance to compete, for championships. That's what this thing's all about. And, this group, I think, is a team that whatever happens on the floor, they're going to continue to fight and continue to battle, and that's all you can ask of your team. So I'm excited about this group. I'm excited about this year, and again, it's a team that I think our fans will really enjoy watching.
Well, Nebraska trying to make a move here in the Big Ten on the hardwood. We'll get a Jock Doc on the way with Hail Varsity.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back in, it's Hail Varsity, and it's time for a Jock Doc Wednesday. Nebraska Orthopedic Center, Dr. Brandon Seifert's with us. Dr. Brandon, how's fantasy going for you?
Cool, a little rough this year, huh? Definitely a little bit rough with the injury side. How about you guys?
Well, things are looking up in a negative way. What I mean by that is everyone that's kicking my butt is losing guys to injury this year in the NFL.
See, that's how I feel good because I got Cooper Kupp back, but at the same time, I'm also the only 0-5 team in my league. Don't feel great about that, but I don't feel as bad as my friend Jacob, who we have $100 in a waiver wire every single year to use, and he used $89 of that on De'Von Achane.
Well, I usually spend $100 because that ain't free in our league. But Dr. Brandon, De'Von Achane is the topic. We kind of burst on the scene for Miami, went off and sustained a knee injury in the win over the Giants last Sunday. Really didn't get much comment on the severity other than it's going to be IR time for him for a few weeks. And you see it, guys who bust their tail to get climbing the ladder for the depth chart, and then they have a little success, and then they got to kind of pull themselves up by their bootstraps yet again. And tough news here for Achane.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, he's had really an amazing kind of breakout season. I think I saw somewhere he's averaged almost 12 yards a game, so pretty amazing the start that he's had. In terms of this injury we're dealing with, they haven't been super forthcoming in terms of what it is. I think there were some subtle hints kind of dropped today that they didn't think it was a super high-grade kind of injury, so it's not sounding something like maybe an ACL. Sounds like a couple weeks of rehab. So we'll take that and run with it a little bit and speculate on what we might think this could be. I would lean more towards, and we talked about this previously, more like an MCL type of sprain is probably pretty common idea or thought they're entertaining. And so with an MCL sprain, basically you're thinking about the inside part of your knee. It's called the medial collateral ligament. And essentially what happens there to injure that is that knee basically kind of travels towards the inside. You tend to open the inside of that knee up, and it stretches that that MCL out. And then as you look at that and think about, okay, what do you do with that? Well, we basically grade it pretty simply, grade 1 to 3. Grade 1 means you've kind of stretched it some, but as you're feeling the ligament on the exam, there's no laxity. As you move into a grade 2 and you're feeling that test in that ligament, you start to have a little bit of looseness there, but you eventually reach a point where it has a nice stopping or endpoint to it. And then once you travel into that grade 3 zone, that's where you basically have completely torn the MCL, and there's really not much in the way of a stopping or endpoint to it. And those are kind of the 3 grades that are out there. And that would be one of the more common injuries we would see, especially with the mechanism he had. If you start to go further down the line, what are some other options here that could be a possibility? Well, one you worry about, a common like a deep bone bruise, or what we call a cartilage or chondral bruise. That's where you bruise the bone underneath the cartilage. That's another thing that can be pretty painful, pretty traumatic initially, but they do tend to heal pretty quickly in terms of when can you return. And so those probably be the 2 most likely things there, since they're not talking about any surgical intervention, at least at this point.
It's Dr. Brandon Seifert with us here at Jock Doc Wednesday, talking De'Von Achane and his knee injury. Not quite sure what it is, but we do know he's going on IR, and that's going to keep him out until at least week 11. It would be week 10, but the Dolphins have their bye week 10, so it's going to be week 11. And Dr. Brandon, with those couple of injuries you just laid out, does that timetable sound about right, that a potential return about 6 weeks from now could be in the cards?
Yep, absolutely. That sounds very reasonable, especially as you start to venture into other areas. Those tend to be more kind of surgically related. So, for example, if this is something like an ACL tear, obviously we'd be talking about surgery already. If this was like a true meniscus tear, again, you're talking about surgery already. If it was something like, perhaps maybe a PCL sprain, that's what we call the posterior cruciate ligament. That's the big ligament behind the ACL, so kind of a different mechanism, different force to injure that. If it's more of a lower grade PCL, grade 1 or 2, then potentially it could be that as well, and that could give you kind of one of those 6-week returns, but a little less likely on the injury spectrum with regard to a PCL.
Let's talk about the treatment here. What is prescribed and what can Achane do while he's healing up to stay in football shape?
Yeah, and so thing here would be about what's his kind of weight-bearing status. And so I would assume he'd be kind of full weight-bearing, but if you start talking about one of those cartilage bruises, then sometimes you'll limit some of that weight-bearing, which then obviously limits some of your cardio. But let's assume this is more ligamentous in nature, he's full weight-bearing. Then you're talking about putting a guy on, start with a stationary bike to start with. You can even do some pool activities, and then, of course, elliptical is always an option. If it's more on the MCL side, kind of lower grade MCL side, then he's probably looking at back, jogging in 2 to 4 weeks, and hopefully, again, that full return to full competition in about 6 weeks.
It's Dr. Brandon Seifert with us here at Jock Doc Wednesday. And Dr. Brandon, one thing that the Dolphins love under Coach McDaniel is the speed. Up until Jamar Chase's touchdown on Sunday, the Dolphins actually had the 6 fastest speeds of the 2023 NFL season between Tyreek Hill, De'Von Achane, and Raheem Mostert. And whenever the speed is such a big factor in De'Von Achane's game, do you worry about that speed factor whenever he comes back coming off the knee injury?
If it's strictly just MCL and maybe more on the cartilage bruise side, then no, his speed should be great. Really the only time we start to see, significant impacts on the speed would be more of a hamstring type of injury, would be more on the speed side. Even a quad injury could cause that. Obviously on the cartilage bruise side, at least on the short term, then sure, there's probably going to be a little bit of limitation there in the speed just as he kind of gets back to full strength and gets back to kind of the confidence with it. Cartilage bruises can be quite painful, and so that also can kind of limit your speed. But if you're, looking at it more from a long view perspective, shouldn't impact his speed at all, at least from an MCL cartilage bruise type scenario.
Dr. Brandon Seifert's with us, Nebraska Orthopedic Center at Jock Doc Wednesday. And Dr. Brandon, when we talk about re-injury with this, if it's a lower grade sprain, how likely is it to get hit again and then suffer a kind of a relapse?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely if we're talking on the MCL side, It's pretty easy to have a kind of a retweak those first couple of weeks, especially it depends obviously on how you're getting tackled and somebody's taking some shots at your knee, then sure, that's pretty easy to retweak it. If you don't really have any big kind of shots to the knee, a little less likely on the tweak side. You usually can kind of control that pretty darn well. He'll come back. If it's an MCL, he'll probably come back with a brace, I would imagine, which also can be effective in that area. Is it more dangerous from a contact standpoint, or could you have something rise up from a non-contact with this sprain? Yeah, honestly, you could get it kind of as a combo. When it comes to MCL sprains, I tend to see more of those via contact versus with our ACLs. We tend to actually see more ACL injuries as non-contact, just kind of landing or cutting awkwardly. Dr. Brandon, last thought here, about 30 seconds. Is there anything fantasy managers should be watching for the next couple weeks to see if Achane's going to be back by that week 11? Any sort of timetable for on-field or contact, I guess, getting back into practice? Yeah, I think if you start to see some of those positive, kind of words coming out of their front office, right on time, timetable looks good. Maybe might move up that timetable, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. If they start to become a little more conservative, kind of guarded in their assessments, maybe we're thinking more closer to playoff kind of return. And obviously, I get a little discouraged by that, and it might be something more significant. If you have an opportunity to kind of view them behind the scenes, if you're seeing him out there, jogging up and down the field here in the next 10 to 14 days, that's a pretty good sign that he's going to be right on pace. Well, we'll get Elijah down to Miami so he can work with Snowflake on the Dolphin pool and spy it out and let everyone else know who's got Achane on their fantasy squad. Dr. Brandon, thanks for a few minutes today. All right, fellas. Take care.
And now,
back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Well, it's going nuts in the city of brotherly love. Philly on top of Atlanta, 6-1, middle of fifth. We'll have some baseball thoughts tomorrow. The great job at Chamberlain going to join us, talk some MLB postseason, some thoughts on Nebraska's fall ball as well. We'll check in with Coach Barnett for Thursday. Brandon Vogel from Counter Reed will join us and get his take with Nebraska's second half prospects. 489-1240. 489-1240. Eat beef with a kind wish to the board here. I wish everyone a safe harvest this fall. Amen to that. Can always find the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Take us with whatever you're doing, wherever you're at. Can also watch the show on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel and the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter feed. Give that a follow. Find Elijah on social media at Herbalessence, Schmidt_radio for my handle. But triple play of baseball going with Astros Twins tonight. Going to check that out. And the Dodgers and Diamondbacks. Listener Rick loves him some Diamondbacks, and they're about ready to do in L.A. We'll see as they lead that series 2-0. But been a pretty fascinating baseball season with how things finished out and then who's been hot and who's under-delivered this postseason. Won't lie to you, if Houston gets bounced, I'm not going to weep. Kind of like the Twins being an underdog. Atlanta and Philly, the best two you could argue this might be your World Series. And you have the Diamondbacks that, a shade over 500. Meanwhile, LA's at 162 coming into this thing. So, and then Baltimore got whacked last night. They were a fun club this season. Yeah. But, man, their starting pitching was just atrocious. Their starting pitching ERA was brutal. They weren't ready for the moment, man. You know what's insane? Across the entire season, they didn't get swept once. No, ever. And then they got swept by the Rangers. Even the Rays. I mean, they got whacked early, too. And the Orioles were my bandwagon postseason team. That's fine. It's the second straight year my bandwagon postseason team has been bounced in short order. Who among us have not thought about buying an Orioles hat? I mean, me. Ever? I don't think I've ever. I actually, my youth baseball team was called the Orioles, so I had an Orioles hat, but not a hat. Not the old school with the O and the bird face on it? It's kind of stupid looking. No, it's stupid for an old guy like me to try and rock. But see, I much prefer the people that go rock like the AA hats, the obscure Well, Vogue's got 1,000 minor league hats. We can talk to them. Those are the ones I like. Yeah, like the Trash Pandas. I love the Trash Pandas. One of my favorite minor league mascots. I'd rock the hell out of
of a Trash Pandas hat.
Just a giant panda on Elijah's
Yeah, but no,
head.
now that the Orioles have been bouncing, I can't be that mad because it's the Rangers. They've been using Creed as their rallying cry all year long. They've been listening to it in the clubhouse to like get themselves fired up. And as somebody who's been on a bit of a Creed kick recently, I
Have you watched the halftime show?
The Cowboys Broncos
Yes.
Thanksgiving Day halftime show where they're flying around on the what would you call those? The curtains?
The wire?
Well, they got like the curtains where the guys flying shirtless through the stadium.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, no, freaking awesome. Of course I've seen that. Anyway, that's
Computer
like
broke again.
I can't be that mad about the fact that the Rangers bounced them. I am a little sad. So now I got to figure out if I want to watch Maction tonight or playoff baseball. Now that my team's been bounced. We have some great games tonight, Schmitty. UTEP at Florida International, Sam Houston at New Mexico State. That just gets the blood pumping right there. Those two games. It's a hell of a night of Maction, you know.
It isn't bad, and
I actually don't even know if any of those teams are MAC. It doesn't
no.
even matter.
I'm gonna go with MLB tonight. Get the podcast, check out the show, and back with you tomorrow at 4 on Hail Varsity, powered by Hurrdat Sports.